everyone, it's Olivia and welcome to this channel where we talk about riso, zines, art, and all sorts of good stuff. Now in this video, we're going to try to give insight into a question that I get asked quite frequently, which is how much can you print on a single ink tube? Maybe you're thinking about getting your own machine and you're trying to estimate costs. And that is a very fair question because I also asked myself the same thing when I was first getting all of this started. As you know, if you're familiar with the riso, it uses ink and the ink comes in these ink cartridges or tubes. And as the machine keeps printing, it keeps using up the ink and eventually the ink tube's ink gets diminished and gets all used up. So the question is, how much mileage can you get on a single ink tube? Well, up until now, my response to this question has always been it really depends on what you're printing. And I'm going to talk a bit more about that as we go along. Right now, I'm going to be working on a rather large print job. I'm going to be printing 150 run of a perfect bound book. It's actually going to be for volume 2 of Pass Me By, which is called Electric Vice. And I'm going to put a link in the description below of the place where you can buy this book or learn more about it and support the creators who are very awesome, very talented, very skilled, and just overall like amazing people. So please check out this book. Check out Pass Me By to Electric Vice. So to start with, I'd like to talk a bit about what are some of the factors that might affect your amount of ink usage. So here is my fluorescent ink cylinder and this is my teal ink cylinder, and this is how the tubes go in. Okay, so one thing that might affect your ink usage is the number of masters you burn. So it doesn't matter if you're printing on a smaller sheet of paper or on a larger sheet of paper. For example, if you're printing on a letter size sheet of paper, which is 8.5 by 11 inches, or if you're printing on a larger tabloid size sheet of paper, which is 11 by 17 inches. No matter what you're printing, this whole entire screen, or master as we call it, is gonna get inked up. And actually, that's the reason why burning masters by itself uses a certain amount of ink, and burning a lot of masters will use up ink faster. So think about it in terms of, are you going to be printing a job that's going to require you to burn a lot of masters, but you're not really printing that many sheets of paper? Well, that's still going to use up quite a bit of ink versus are you burning one master and then printing thousands of sheets of paper off of that one master. So think about it in terms of there is an amount of ink that is being used just to set up your masters. Another factor to consider in terms of ink usage is what's the surface area of ink coverage that you are printing. For example, if you are only printing a small area, a small little dot that is pink, then that's going to use up less ink slower than if you were printing a larger surface area of ink. Let's say if you're like filling up an entire sheet of paper in pink ink, that's going to use up more ink faster. So you're going to go through this tube a lot faster. So it pretty much works like any inkjet printer that uses an ink cartridge. You know, when you print with those CMYK inkjets, sometimes you run out of cyan or magenta faster than like yellow or black because you just happen to be printing in those colors more. It's the same concept with the riso, except for obviously the ink tubes are way larger, so you could print many more sheets of paper. With these considerations in mind, that's why it's a little bit hard to say or to give a definitive answer as to how many sheets of paper you're going to get out of a single tube of ink, because it really depends on your usage. But what we're gonna do is with this Pass Me By Volume 2 project, which is probably gonna run me about 4,000 sheets of paper and definitely more than one tube of ink, I'm gonna keep track of how much ink I am using for every set of print, so that if anything, at least you can have a better idea of the mileage of each ink tube with the amount of coverage and size of prints that I am making as I am printing this project. but also hopefully show you some more of the process of printing. I know I already did a video of printing the first volume, which I will link in the description below, and also put up a thumbnail here of that video if you're interested in checking it out. But yeah, let's get started on the printing. Alright, so at this point, I think I've printed over 1,500 sheets of paper easily, and if you've been noticing, most of the sheets of paper are very pink ink heavy. So if we look at the pink ink tube, you can see that it's way less now than the teal ink, and that's to be expected because, as I've mentioned previously, how fast or how slow you use up your ink really depends on what you're printing. So actually this project is still considered to be very ink heavy. So even though the teal ink is being used up at a slower rate than the pink ink, I would say that both inks are still being used up quite fast compared to other projects that probably have more white space or are more text heavy. So I just want to take a second to quickly flip through this book because I want to point out something that may not be as evident earlier in the process, and that is that if you look, there really is quite a bit of pink in this run. So that explains why I have used up so much more pink ink than teal ink. Hi everyone, so I finally entered all of the data from the Pass Me By Book project into Excel, and so here is all the information that I have, and I'm gonna go through it with you now, as well as provide you some conclusions that I garnered from it, in the hopes that it will shed a bit more insight into the long-standing question that I've been getting a lot, which is how much can you print on a single ink tube? So let's get started. So over here under number of pages, you can see that it says 42 pages. What that actually means is 21 sheets of paper because each sheet of paper has a front page and a back page. So the same principle applies to impressions printed. Over here it says that I printed 10,727 impressions, but that actually translates to over 5,000 sheets of paper because each sheet of paper has a front impression for the front page and a back impression for the back page. So think of it this way, if I were printing single-sided sheets of paper, the 10,727 number would translate to 10,727 sheets of paper printed. But because I am printing double-sided, the actual amount of sheets of paper I got was roughly half of this number. Something that you might have noticed is that each page is two color in teal and pink, but sometimes I burned the same master multiple times. So here in the case of page 1, I burned 4 teal masters and 4 pink masters. Here on page 10, I had to reburn a pink master, and so on and so forth. There are a few pages here that gave me trouble where I just had to fix the master and had to burn another one. Especially in the case of page 1, because this is sort of me trying to figure out what is the best configuration for printing the rest of the book. I had to figure that all out on page 1, and that just involved me burning 4 masters, each of teal and pink, just to start off. And then the rest of it was a bit more streamlined. As you can see, the rest of it was mostly just me burning 1 master for each color. To measure the amount of ink usage, I weighed each color ink tube separately before and after printing each set. So for example, here for page 7, I started off with 686 grams of teal ink, and after printing 249 impressions and burning 2 masters, I ended up with 632 grams of teal ink, which translates to 54 grams of teal ink used. Same with pink. I started off with 518 grams of ink left in the pink ink tube, and after printing 249 impressions and 2 masters, I ended up with 444 grams of pink ink left in the tube, which translates to 74 grams of pink ink used. Over here, whenever I had to switch over to a brand new ink tube because I had used up the previous one, I highlighted that cell in that particular color. And this doesn't mean that I finished one teal ink tube and then I had to start off another one like right after. Actually, when you think about it, I had to print page 1, 3, 5, 7, like all the odd numbers first, and then flip over all the sheets of paper and then printed all of the back sides. I chose to organize my page not in the order in which I printed, but in the actual order of the page numbering. But like, just to illustrate what happened here was I printed page 1, 3, 5, 7, all the way to page 29, and then I printed page 31, 33, 35, and then I made it all the way back to the even numbers, and I only had to switch over to a new ink tube once I got to page 30 of all the even numbered back sides. Whereas here you could see that I have 3 pink cells highlighted, which means I had to switch over to a brand new ink tube 3 times. And that makes sense because, as we saw earlier in this video, the amount of intensity and coverage that fluorescent pink ink had for this particular project was significantly more compared to teal. As you can see here, for teal we only used up 1.73 tubes of ink to make more than 10,000 or even almost 11,000 impressions, whereas for fluorescent pink ink we had to use 3 full tubes of fluorescent pink ink. So the total number of tubes used for this project was 4.75 tubes. So here you could see that the amount of fluorescent pink ink used is around double that of the amount of teal ink used. And I do have a graph here that shows you that. So in the x-axis we have the page numbers, and on the y-axis we have the grams. So as you can see, almost for every single page we're using way more fluorescent pink than we are teal. And when you add that all up, you get pretty much around double. Alright, so there are a couple of numbers that I crunched for you because I was also curious about them. In particular, I know that burning masters uses up relatively more ink than printing sheets of paper. So when you send a file to be printed and a new master is created and the riso has to ink up that master to prepare it to make impressions, that process, I believe it uses relatively more ink than just printing out the sheets. And I wanted to know what the impact of that was for this project. So when I thought to measure that, I wasn't able to start it right from the beginning. I started at around page 20, 1 onwards. So I have partial data, but it's like 75% of the data is there. So after running some numbers for it, I came up with these figures. So for the teal ink usage per master, I used up about 14 grams of ink on average just to ink up a master. And for the pink ink usage, I used up about 15 grams of pink ink just to ink up the master. So what does that mean in terms of how much ink do masters use up? So to illustrate why this is a pretty high percentage, meaning it's a lot of ink just going to burning and inking up masters, this 30% number, it's because when you look at the data, I burned 48 masters for the whole project. So that's 48 masters compared to almost 11,000 impressions. But just burning masters is already 30% of the ink usage. So if we took the total amount of teal ink tubes used and multiplied that by 30%, it shows that we spent almost half of an ink tube just burning the teal masters. And same with the pink ink. So over here in our pie chart, we see that we used up 20% just to burn and ink up masters. And I burned 52 masters on the pink side to print the project, right? So then if I took the number of ink tubes and I multiplied that by 20% right there, you could see that I used more than half of a full ink tube just to ink up masters. Ultimately, what this proves is that burning and inking masters can be expensive because not only do you have to consider the cost of the master, but you have to consider the fact that burning that master actually uses up more ink than just printing lots of sheets of paper up to a certain extent. And that is something that you want to factor in when you are, stocking up your ink for inventory or pricing out your projects. Let's say you have a project where you're burning a ton of masters, maybe because there's a lot of different kinds of impressions that you need to make, or there are just a lot of different colors that you need to overlay on a single sheet of paper. Well, that's going to be quite an expensive project compared to, let's say you're just burning one master and you're printing a lot of impressions on it. Of course, up to a certain extent, because eventually you will use up a bunch of ink, right? Anyway, so that is it for our risograph ink usage number crunching session. I hope you found it useful, and if you did, please like, subscribe, and comment what you liked about it, I guess. More importantly though, if you found the information in this video valuable, please support the artists that made it possible. So here are a couple of websites where you can purchase a copy of Pass Me By and support the artists. So here is the Renegade Arts website, and here is Kyle's website where you can go to Kyle's shop and grab the book directly. Kyle has the Risograph edition in their shop. So yeah, please support these artists. It's very important for all of us to support each other in our wonderful community. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have today. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you in the next video.
There we go. Holy shit.
Ooh, they're so thick. That's a thick boy.
Ooh, the size is sick. I love that crease that the riso gets.
Mm-hmm.
Look at that pink.
Yeah.
Whoa.
It looks really good.
Wow. That pink.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
That
that looks
pink
awesome.
glow.
That gradient looks really good. Don't mind that, it's my stove. That looks so good.
Wow. Check it out. I was wondering how the teal text would look, but it's pretty cool.
Yeah, that looks really good.
Shit.
Whoa, it looks like almost 3D, eh?
It is in some of them because of the offset.
Yeah.
Wow, that pink text. Fucking cool.
It's funny to see from the posters to that.
Yeah. Wow, some of these look so good.
I mean, all of it looks so good.
Check out the pink couch in the green room.
Yeah, the chair.
Shit.
Hey.
Wow.
This is so exciting.
Wow. This looks fucking wild
Yeah.
in the Riso.
It's more
Whoa.
readable than I expected it to be.
Yeah.
Like,
This
there
this
looks
effect
so
that I
cool.
had is so cool in Riso.
yeah. Wow, with the mouth on the front.
The motel. Ooh. Ooh, and then it kind of like greens out here.
Oh, wow. That's so interesting.
This looks really good. The makeup. Yo.
Oh.
Alright, we better stop showing soon. Shit, that looks good.
This is just Varaz.
Yeah.
Wow, the color swapping
Mm-hmm.
looks really, really cool. Especially because, like, you kind of made the drawing method based off of the Riso method
This
of, like,
looks
the layers.
good.
Yeah.
This looks good. Yeah, how's this final scene look? Shit, yeah. The highlight on the jacket is
Yeah.
so good.
The lightning. Yeah.
Yeah. I was really like, yeah.
Yes, of course. And of course, our. Oh, that's like interesting. I like it.
These look cool. Yeah, how's the Liz Paul look? Yeah, that's dope. Okay, I'm gonna sit down and look at it.
Okay.